You are listening to Claret and Blue, an Aston Villa podcast brought to you by Birmingham Live.
Hello and welcome back to the Claret and Blue podcast. My name is John Townley and I'm joined today by our women's football expert, Hannah Pinnock, who covers the Midlands teams, obviously including Villa. So Hannah, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and you've just come out of the Villa press conference with Carla Ward and different players as well. So Hannah's job basically is to cover Villa. She's been doing it for a few months now. So we thought we'll get her on, and probably it's been a bit sort of, we should have done it earlier, I think, because Villa have obviously had a very good season so far, and hopefully we'll catch it before the season ends. But can you give us a quick lowdown of, for those who don't know, how Villa have done this season?
Yeah, it's been hugely positive for them, I think. If you were to end the season now and they're fifth in the table, like you said, and in an FA Cup semi-final, I think they'd be quite happy with that. Obviously, like any season, there's been sort of highs and lows, probably a couple of results that they'll look back on and won't be too happy with. I think you can probably put the defeat to Man United at Old Trafford in that sort of category, and there was a defeat to Arsenal at Villa Park before Christmas as well. So there's a few in there, but other than that, I mean, since January at least, they've been in fantastic form. I think they've only lost one game in all competitions in 2023, and that was against Arsenal in the Conti Cup quarter-final. So there's been a couple of draws in there, but predominantly wins. And it's funny because I think Carla's first press conference at the beginning of the season, she said, we publicly to the media, we want top 8, which would have been steady progress in terms of, where they've been since they've sort of come up to the WSL. But privately, and it's since come out that they're actually wanting top 6, and they're well on track to do that. They're fifth at the moment. They beat Everton and West Ham in the last sort of few weeks, who are probably their closest contenders for fifth. So yeah, they are in fantastic form, but obviously there's still plenty of football to be played. So where they are at the end of the season, we'll see. But in terms of where they are at the moment, they'll be very, very pleased with it.
Most fans will know Villa women have come up from the WSL a couple of seasons ago. So to be where they are now, as you said, although the season hasn't ended, but you'd like to think that they're going to sort of stick around in the position that they are in. But to come up from the Championship and then not just survive in the WSL, because you usually see a lot of teams come up and then struggle, and Villa might have, but they stayed in the division and then have kicked on. So is that testament to how well the club is, I suppose, run, how well they've adapted to the WSL as well, now that they can not just, beat the teams in and around them and survive, but they can, sort of compete amongst the best 4 teams in the division? The
WSL is very much dominated by those 4 teams at the top in Chelsea, Arsenal, and both of the Manchester clubs, which, all those teams are there on merit. They've always sort of been, maybe less so Man United because they've sort of like come up more recently, but in terms of Chelsea and Arsenal especially, they've always sort of been ahead of the curve in terms of women's football, and they've invested early and they are where they are on merit. But from Villa's point of view, you're absolutely right, teams do struggle when they come up. Villa did, their first season, they were in a bit of a relegation fight. They were somewhat comfortable in the end, but they were sort of in that bottom end of the table. And even last season, it's obviously it was Birmingham City that got relegated, so I'm sure Villa fans will be happy about that. But in that respect, the fact that they are where they are now is hugely impressive. And I think for me, I might be alone in thinking this, but one of the things that has really impressed me about Villa this season is the injury list that they've had to contend with has been mammoth. I remember the game at Villa Park before Christmas against Arsenal and looking at the team sheet, and it was like 4 players on it. I think Hannah Hampton had just come back from injury. Emily Gilnick was on the bench and probably still only half fit because she's been in and out with injuries. I think she's injured again now. And then there was like 2 academy players, and I'm just like, that's crazy. And then when you look at the depth of Arsenal, it's like that's insane. So Villa have had huge amounts of injuries to contend with this season. I think they've been quite lucky in the fact that, and touch wood, it's not really been, their big hitters in like Rachel Daley or Kenza Daley, but, Carla has had to, particularly before Christmas, before they added, Jordan Nobbs and Lucy Staniforth to the mix, she was having to ask the same players to go again and again and again. And obviously that really sort of limits what you can do tactically and in terms of like changing things up in a game if it's getting away from you. So I personally think it's really impressive that they are where they are in the standings now, despite the fact that they've had to face a lot of challenges this season. So I think that's testament to both Carla Ward and the squad, really.
It's hard to sort of get over that, and you sort of forgive the players for thinking, oh, okay, well, we can settle for, I don't know, being in the top half of the season or whatever it may be, but they've got a bit of a gap as well to the teams below them. So as the men's team does as well. But again, as you mentioned, the injuries, that is testament to not only how well they've done this season, but how well Carla Ward's coped with those problems, those issues, and they've gone again. And to be the best of the rest is, a top achievement. And I suppose everyone else in the WSL looking at Villa and thinking, oh, that's how you do it.
Absolutely. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like a lot of teams in the WSL have had injury concerns. I just think Villa's has been exceptionally difficult and probably gone a little bit under the radar, if that makes sense. But yeah. I mean, you do have to be extremely careful because, Villa are, as things stand, sort of the best of the rest, which is a hugely positive place to be in. But it's one thing to get there, but it's another thing to stay there, if that makes sense. So that'll certainly be the challenge for them moving forward.
How are they going to do that? Is that just consistency of results, carry on as they're doing, or are Villa just having a very good season and then next season they might tail off ever slightly? I know no one wants that to happen, but do you know what I mean? Is that a consistency thing? Is it just to keep the same results as they've been going this season and into the next? Or is it, are they overachieving is what I'm trying to say? Or is it actually Villa have got a very good squad of players here. Carla Ward's done an exceptional job to develop them as well, and they're getting results. It's almost like a perfect sort of marriage between everything.
Certainly don't think they're overachieving. I think they absolutely deserve to be where they are, and it sort of has been steady progress for them. And I think Carla's done a fantastic job since she's come in, and she has spoken a lot about they're not going to chuck money at it. They're not, they're going to build, but they're going to do it in the right way, and they're going to continue to build sustainably. I think if they're to stay there, I think really keeping their best players will be really important. Obviously, kind of have, when a team's doing well, obviously everyone's sort of looking at them, and obviously if there's certain players in there that are doing exceptionally well, whether or not sort of the top four will sort of look at that and want to poach a few. Hopefully that won't be the case. And I think, if Villa can keep a hold of their big hitters next season and keep consistency within the squad, that would be massive. But, you do have to be really careful because in the WSL, it is a very small league and it's a very competitive league, and things can change very quickly. I mean, when Spurs got promoted a few years ago as well, and ever since they've been in the WSL, they've pretty much been comfortably mid-table, but this season they're in a relegation fight, so it can just change just like that. And as long as, and I'm sure Villa won't, because they are doing things in the right way, and they are one of the teams in the WSL that certainly are investing what they need to in their women's team. So I'm confident that they'll long be a WSL team, and that I'm sure that'll be the case. But in terms of staying where they are in the table, consistency in terms of the squad, and the fact that Carla recently they extended her contract recently is massive as well, because it will keep that consistency. And if they keep building the way that they are, then they should hopefully stay in that top six.
We'll move on to, I suppose, the big hitters. One of the big hitters, or the big hitter, I suppose, is Rachel Daley. She's been on fire this season, hasn't she? She joined in the summer. And how well has she done this campaign?
How long have we got? She is, I love watching Rachel Daley. She is a fantastic player, and it was quite funny in a press conference earlier, Carla actually got asked about the amount of goals that they've scored this season, because I think last season in the WSL they only scored 13, and they've scored double that already this season with 7 games to go, I think. So And when she was asked about that, she simply just said Rachel Daley scores goals. And she does. She is fantastic. And, she's up there in the Golden Boot race as well. And she has been all season. I know Bunny Shaw's kind of, Man City's Bunny Shaw's kind of gaining a little bit of headway now. But, I mean, Rachel Daley's certainly in the race. And she's one of the best strikers in the league. I mean, everyone talks about how amazing, players like Sam Kerr and Alessia Russo are. But Rachel Daley scored more WSL goals than both of them, not combined, but she scored more than Sam Kerr, she scored more than Alessia Russo. She's absolutely fantastic, and I think you cannot understate the importance of having a clinical goal scorer in your team. And I think that's something that Villa have probably struggled with over the years, and I've covered Villa on and off since they've been in the WSL. And I remember that first season especially, I think it was Stina Larsson was their striker, and I think she scored maybe 1 goal, at least in the WSL, in her sort of whole time there. And without sort of having that goal scorer that you can really rely on, you're going into games, and if you go a goal behind, you're sort of thinking, well, that's game over then, because you can't really see where the goal's coming from. That's completely not the case with Villa this season. If Rachel Daley's on the pitch, you always feel like something's going to happen. Like there is a sense of inevitability about her, and she is just, and she's not just scoring any goals, she's scoring big goals as well. I mean, she scored the winner against Manchester City on Sunday. She's stepping up in the big moments, and she is an absolute delight to watch.
How does it work in the WSL in terms of transfers and transfer interest? Because obviously in the men's game, if Villa have a striker who is, one of the top scorers in the division, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, they're all over it, and obviously teams in Europe as well. So how has it worked in previous seasons, maybe in the WSL, in terms of top players playing for clubs who aren't in the top four or in the Champions League? How does that work? Let's say if a club comes knocking for Rachel Daley, will she be like, well, actually, I'm playing every game here, I'm in the England squad and I'm scoring goals, and I don't want to come to that club because I might not play as many games? And whereas in the men's game, they might be paid like double, triple the money. So how does that sort of complex work in the women's game?
In many ways, it's the same, because obviously players will want to play for clubs where, they have an opportunity to win stuff, but game time is important as well. Obviously, it for Jordan Nobbs especially, it wouldn't have been an easy decision to leave Arsenal in January, but with the World Cup on the horizon, she had to, because she needed game time. So that is certainly an element of it. A lot of players do want to play, obviously, and where the wages aren't as big, that they're probably less inclined to just sit on the bench and collect a paycheck. Do you know what I mean? But it operates in a similar way. If a big club comes knocking for players, they'll go. It's something that Liverpool's certainly struggled with in the WSL over the years. They had a lot of fantastic players, and a fantastic squad when they won back-to-back league titles in 2013, 2014. But then the bigger clubs come knocking, and their players get taken. So it very much does operate in the same way. But I think for the women's game especially, a lot of it is down to the environment as well. And obviously with any player, you want to be comfortable where you're playing, and you want to have a good relationship with the manager and with the squad and everything like that. But I think it's more important in the women's game, because they haven't got those massive paychecks that the men's game will have. So they do want to be in an environment where they feel like they're developing, where they feel like it's a positive place to be. And I remember reading something a few years back when Liverpool got relegated. It was a piece from the BBC. I think it was written ages ago, but something from that piece stuck with me about how like Liverpool might pay you more, but you'll feel treated better at other clubs, if that makes sense. So I think Villa are probably in a positive place where the environment that Carla's created is a fantastic one, and the players have sort of spoken very highly of it this season, especially that it's a very together squad. It's a very positive place to be, so players will want to play for Villa. But again, I mean, the money in the WSL, in the women's game and the WSL, isn't as much. I think the most expensive WSL signing, at least, it was Beth England in January, going from Chelsea to Tottenham. I think even that was only 500,000. So it's different but similar in many ways, if that makes sense. That was a very long-winded answer to that.
I think it's very interesting, because a lot of obviously Villa fans who watch the men's game, there's a lot to not like in some ways, and it's sort of refreshing to know that players, at least in the women's game, or some of them anyway, prefer to be in different sort of environments and cultures that they prefer. And in the men's game, it's very different. If a top club comes in, and it's almost like it's a done deal straight away, and then they go there and spend 3 years of their career on the bench, and then they go back somewhere else, and it stagnates their career. So it is interesting. Who else has stood out for you in particular in the Villa squad? Obviously, Rachel Daley is scoring a lot of goals, but it's the whole squad. It's not just the 11 either, is it? So yeah, who else gets the sort of Hannah Pinnock honourable mention, I suppose?
I mean, you could probably name the entire regular starting 11, to be honest, because they do tend to perform week in, week out. I think Kenza Daley has been absolutely fantastic for Villa this season as well. She's been a huge signing, and probably a very strong contender for signing of the season as well, probably along with Rachel. And I think the partnership as well that she's sort of formed with Jordan Nobbs since they signed her in January, but also the link up with Rachel Daley as well. Like, there's so many like positive relationships on the pitch, and it's almost telepathic. They know where each other are, and it's just, fantastic to watch. I think Kirsty Hansen as well has been brilliant. It's a shame it's only a loan, but whether or not that can be made permanent, you never know. But I'm sure Man United will probably want to keep her as well. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many fantastic players, and, Rachel isn't the only player scoring goals. Kenza Daley scores goals. Kirsty Hansen scores goals. They've got goals in defence as well. It was Rachel Corsie, who was playing at centre back on Sunday against Man City, that scored the header for the opening goal in that FA Cup game. So, they are starting to find goals all over the pitch, and there's so many players that you can give credit to. But just stepping away from Rachel Daley, for me personally, just watching them, it would certainly be Kenza Daley, who is right up there.
If we go back to sort of the culture element, because I thought that was interesting about Carla Ward, and Villa have had great results and whatever it may be, but if you sort of strip away it and look deeper, it is probably that culture and that environment that she's built and is continuing to build that is so important, I suppose, to the Villa women's team. And that's not only why players might feel like they want to come to Villa over other clubs, but that also gets results. It builds a mentality, doesn't it, and a positive place to be. I've been to the women sort of training campus at Bodymore Heath, and it is very positive. And Carla Ward has done a great job, but I think particularly the culture, as you say, that she's built, that's probably a sort of big tick next to her name.
I mentioned it earlier, but it says a lot as well that the club have opted to extend her contract as well. So obviously, like I said, that does keep that consistency, and she is a manager that players want to play for. I mean, I know Jordan Nobbs needed to sort of complete that move for game time with the World Cup on the horizon, but at the same time, she doesn't just leave Arsenal for anyone. Arsenal's a club that means a hell of a lot to her. She spent most of her career there, so that was probably a really tough, difficult move to make, but she wanted to come to Villa. She felt like she'd get game time at Villa, and she felt like she'd develop at Villa, and she'd be able to play her game and impress Serena Wiegman, and hopefully get selected for that World Cup squad. And that is testament. I don't know for certain, but I imagine Carla Ward probably did play a huge part in making that happen as well. So, you've got really experienced, really high caliber level of players that want to play for Carla Ward, and she gets a hell of a lot out of their players as well, and I think she is a fantastic manager. And obviously it's a team effort, but obviously a lot of Villa's success this season can be put down to her and the environment that she's created.
It's almost looking forward a little bit more. Villa sitting in fifth, the best of the rest as such. How hard is it for them to go a step further than that? And obviously I think, to be honest, the step further is probably just consolidating that and being consistent season after season. But above that is obviously the top four, who seem to be a bit insurmountable. Is it possible to break that or get close to it, or is it a bit, a step too far potentially?
I mean, they are relatively close, really, when you think about it. But I think when I look at the table and you sort of do look at the goals scored, for example, I think Villa have scored 27 this season, but that's only 5 behind Man City and maybe 6 behind Arsenal. And then the team that scored the most after them is maybe Tottenham with 18, but that's because they had a mad result against Brighton that was 9-0 or something. But in that respect, Villa are certainly scoring the goals, and I do think they're scoring the level of goals sort of that puts them not on a par, but they're scoring goals that really, they could be competing with those top teams. But I think where they fall short slightly is the goals conceded. I think Man United and Arsenal have both conceded less than 10 goals this season, whereas Chelsea and Man City have conceded less than 20, and Villa are up on 25. And don't get me wrong, there's teams in the WSL that concede a hell of a lot more when you look at Brighton and Leicester, but in that respect they're maybe scoring the goals that sort of puts them up there, but they're probably conceding a few too many, and maybe sort of need to level that out a bit. But in terms of goal difference, there's only 2 teams outside of the top 4 that have a positive goal difference, and that's Villa and Everton. So in that respect, what they are doing this season is really, really impressive. And in terms of breaking into the top 4, you never know. Like, you've got to believe, otherwise why are you here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, everyone might as well just pack up and go home and let the top 4 compete every season. You know what I mean? So you've got to believe you can do it. Obviously, they are building sustainably, and they aren't just going to chuck loads of money at it to get there. But I do think they are on an upward trajectory, and they are going in the right direction for sure. But like I said, things can change ever so quickly in the WSL, and you might be battling for top 5 one season, and then you let standards slip slightly, and suddenly you're in a relegation fight. So it like I said earlier, it's one thing to get there, but a huge other challenge to stay there. So that'll be a huge challenge for them in seasons to come. But as long as you're there or thereabouts, if any of the top 4 sort of have a bit of a drop off or have an off season, then as long as you're there, you'll be there to capitalize on it, and potentially that could happen. And it's the same with the men's game, really, isn't it? If teams like Liverpool have an off season and they're not in the top 4, then other teams will be there to capitalize. So yeah, that's very similar in that respect.
As we mentioned as well earlier, the cup, Villa haven't done too bad in the cup as well. Obviously in the semi-finals now, and we beat or Villa, should I say, beat Man City in the quarter-final. That's some result. As we just said, like, the top 4's insurmountable. You can't get past it. Oh, well, I did. But that proves that you can beat these teams. And I know it was a cup game, but it's just say because Villa score goals, they can win, a game, sort of, an off game or whatever it may be. And now we're in the semi-finals. It's a shame we got pulled out against Chelsea, because I think, was it Brighton that were in the semis as well with, was it Man United? I think. So yeah, Chelsea will be a very tough game, but getting to a semi-final is again testament to Carla Ward, testament to the club and how far they've come over the last few years.
Yeah, and it was some game as well. Don't get me wrong, I was livid with Rachel Daley that it was 6 minutes into extra time, because I'd covered Birmingham City in their quarter-final before that and had to go straight over, and it was freezing cold. I was like, I want to be in my warm car. But I was like, if you just scored that 6 minutes sooner, that would have been a huge help. And to be fair, Villa should have scored like literally with the last kick of the 90 minutes, but it literally went like marginally wide. I can't remember who it was though. But yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic game, and I think Carla said it in a press conference that it's probably the highlight of her managerial career in terms of the way that they won that game, the opponent, and everything like that. I think maybe if you'd asked Villa, they'd probably want to play Man City every week, because I don't know what it is, but they just seem to get results against Man City.
They had the result at the start of the season, didn't they?
Yeah, the 4-3 win at Villa Park, and then they went away to Man City, I think it was in January, and got a 1-1 draw. So I don't know if that sort of played a part in it, the fact that they have had big results against Man City already this season, that it gives them the confidence that they need, but also probably played a little bit in the back of the minds of Man City as well, that they know Villa aren't here to roll over. It's going to be a tough fight, and that's exactly what it was. And Man City had their chances, and when everyone talks about sort of Bunny Shaw and Rachel Daley and the fight for the Golden Boot, but on that occasion it was certainly Rachel Daley that came out on top, and huge achievement. The first time they've reached a semi-final, and I think when they've spoken about what their ambitions were for this season, it was to reach a cup quarter-final. They reached the quarter-finals of the Conti Cup. They got knocked out by Arsenal, but they'd already reached a quarter-final, and now they've reached the quarter-final of the FA Cup, and they've gone that step further and reached the semi-finals as well. So yeah, huge achievement, and you never know, they could go that one step further.
My prediction is that we'll win the cup and finish in the top 4. What's yours? Looking long term, what is Villa's? Well, firstly, what are your predictions for this season? Although it's about to end, we are in the sort of the final third. But what's Villa's long-term plan? Is it to remain where they are and just keep competing, almost like the men's team, I suppose? There's Villa as a football club have sort of lagged behind in recent years, and now there's more of a positivity about it. And the men's team are trying to be in like European positions, and the women's team are also trying to do the same thing, I suppose, kind of be the best of the rest. But then in years to come, why can't they be attached to a top 5, should we say, and open that up a little bit. So what is Villa's thing? What is their long-term plan with the women's team?
They could win the cup. You never know. I think Chelsea is certainly the toughest draw they could have gone. They probably would have preferred Brighton, let's be real, because I'm sure they would have preferred to come up against Chelsea in the final rather than the semi-finals. But, never say never. It's a huge test. But essentially I find it quite interesting the way that the fixtures kind of fall for that semi-final, especially because they play Chelsea next weekend in the WSL, and then it's the international break, and then it's the FA Cup semi-final. So in terms of games that they play, they're essentially playing Chelsea back to back. And I always find that kind of dynamic quite interesting when you're coming up against the same team in quite quick succession. And I think we kind of saw that when Chelsea played Arsenal in the FA Cup, and then the Conti Cup final a week later. It 2 very different games and 2 very different results. So you never know. But also from Chelsea's perspective, a week after that FA Cup semi-final, they might have a Champions League semi-final. And for them, like, don't get me wrong, Emma Hayes is a serial winner and she'll want to win everything she possibly can. And Chelsea are the holders of the FA Cup for a reason. But the one thing that's always evaded them is that Champions League. So they currently have a 1-0 lead over Lyon. And if they can get the job done at Stamford Bridge next week and potentially have a semi-final sort of lined up a week after that FA Cup semi-final, then don't get me wrong, they're absolute professionals. But if there's 1 or 2 sort of even the more inexperienced players in the squad that already sort of have their eye on that Champions League semi-final, because if they knock out the holders of the Champions League, for them, they'll probably feel like it's their best opportunity to finally win the one trophy that they've not won. So if that even creates the slightest drop-off from Chelsea's point of view, I absolutely believe that Villa will be there to capitalise, even in the smallest of percentage, because for Villa, it'll be the biggest game of their careers. Do you know what I mean? Whereas Chelsea might have a Champions League semi-final a week later. So I might be reading way too into that, but I do think it is, it players are human at the end of the day, and the Champions League is the Champions League. And, because that game comes literally a week later, some minds might already be on that. So that's probably one game to keep an eye on next week is Chelsea quarter-final, and whether or not they do get it over the line against Lyon. But in terms of, general predictions, I do think they are not nailed on, but I'm pretty confident they'll finish 5th. At the very least, it'll be top 6, which is the in-house target that they've had all season. So that's a success. But long term, like you said, I think they are probably the one team that you look at the moment, at least, and think they probably are the closest to that sort of top 4. And, in terms of like closing the gap, as long as they keep doing that, then, like you said, you can sort of maybe open that up to a top 5 almost. So yeah, long term, as Carla's said many times, they'll keep building, but they'll build sustainably. And as long as they're there or thereabouts, then who knows what can happen in football.
I hope the viewers have taken lots of information off Hannah's 30-minute podcast with us. We will catch up with Hannah before, hopefully, the end of the season, if not at the end of the season. I think it's really interesting, Hannah, all the points you raised, because a lot of fans of the men's team won't be as clued up with the women's team as I am as well. So you've taught me at least 10 things in our 30-minute chat. So thanks for that. And we'll be back for another video shortly. Dan is doing a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of different videos, short videos as well. Hopefully you enjoy this sort of longer form content as well. And we'll be back soon. So please leave a like rating, and thank you. Up the Villa.
Thank you for listening to Claret and Blue, an Aston Villa podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please do let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode, but until then, up the Villa.